Hey, good evening. I'm Richard French. The toll of September 11th has weighed heavily on so many people in so many different ways. Now, for one man in our region, he lost his wife and the mother of his children, and there's been no let-up in the pain and the stress. Now, he's facing deportation to the place that he calls home and the place where his wife's body is buried. Kat Greenleaf is at the Palisades Center with this emotional story. Kat?
Good evening, Rich. You know, I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of families who lost members after the World Trade Center attacks. Many of those families face uncertain futures because of problems with the INS and their visas. This story, however, looks like it might have a happy ending.
We married here, then we had another child, you know, and we lived our lives, you know, like everyone else would.
This Russian family's American dream began like that of so many immigrants over the years. Then, just before 9 a.m. on September 11th, 2001, their nightmare began.
At 8:50 a.m., my wife was on the phone. She told me something terrible is happening, that the airplane struck the first tower. But don't worry about us, she says. Everything is under control. They told us to stay on the place and not go. I mean, everything is fine. That's how she sounded. You know, don't worry. I'll be back home by 5.
Tatiana Ryhov's body was recovered over time in pieces, and the days and months to follow were sheer horror for her husband Vasily and their 2 sons, Alex and Daniel.
There are 2 ways dealing with the situation. One is just quit, and the other one is just face it and live life and keep going.
Just as the family was regaining a routine in their lives, another blow was dealt. At the proceedings to get his green card, Mr. Ryhov was let in on an ugly secret.
The government then came around in the last weeks and denied Vasily's application for permanent residence, indicating that another application for a phony marriage was lodged on his behalf. We emphatically denied that he had knowingly did that. In fact, after the World Trade Center attacks on September 11th, we found out through the Freedom of Information Act that this application had in fact been put by an unscrupulous attorney, that Vasily had no idea had put the application in.
Why? According to Manhattan immigration specialist Alexis Axelrad, such fraud is perpetrated on immigrants all the time.
Especially immigrant populations are so susceptible to people, you know, they know nothing about the immigration system and the laws. And they just trust these people who say, I'm an expert, I know, and then they try to, you know, get help from them.
Vasily had paid over $4,000 to his so-called lawyer. Now faced with the threat of deportation back to what he calls a terrorist state, Mr. Ryhov and his present lawyer, Michael Wilds, began petitioning the INS.
We were shocked in the days following the attack that this had actually been put forward, and ultimately we were shocked that the Immigration Service didn't rise above the facts of the case and do the right thing here. And the right thing for a family that's grieving is to make sure that they're not dealing with bureaucrats and lawyers, but with psychiatrists and family therapists to see that these 2 young children can adopt properly.
And they've recruited some heavy hitters.
Let me just say that the terrorists who attacked the Twin Towers and murdered Vasily's wife, Tatiana, hated America for the very same reasons that the Ryhovs want to stay here.
Senator Chuck Schumer is putting pressure on the INS to exhaust all possibilities for keeping this man in the States and keeping this family together.
There's a provision in the Patriot Act, which was just passed 6 months ago, which says that the INS, for those who were lost, has to go through every loophole to help the families obtain citizenship. The unfairness for the Ryhovs was a simple one, that had their mother lived, they'd be on the path to citizenship.
For now, the Ryhov family waits in limbo, placing all their faith in the U.S. system and sense of justice. According to their lawyer, there's no backing down.
We won't. If we have to get an act of Congress passed, we will.
You know, Rich, it's going to be interesting to watch this case now and see how it moves forward with the senator's weight behind it. Back to you.
And we have some new developments on this case tonight, and it's news that Mr. Rijov will definitely be pleased to hear. Immigration and Naturalization Service has agreed to let him and his 2 children remain in the United States. Still some questions pending, and we're going to get an explanation on that further. And for more on that, I'm now joined by Mr. Rijov's attorney. Michael Wiles joins us. He's also a member of the City Council in Englewood, New Jersey, and he joins us out of our Manhattan studio tonight. Michael, it's good news, but it's hardly a finished product. Explain what happened today, but nonetheless, why it's good news for your client.
I explained to my client that it's sort of like pregnancy. It's either yes or it's no, and anything short of a yes is, in fact, still a no. Our client is very concerned still, as his children are, for whether or not their future will be facilitated on U.S. soil. After all, their mother and wife is buried here, and the government would contemplate the way the case has been crafted so far, that they would be separated. And the fact is that the senator, the good senator from New York, that is Senator Schumer, not that Hillary Clinton wasn't good, but she didn't rise to the occasion on this opportunity, did call the Immigration Service up and looked with an eye towards getting this case favorably approved. And the word that we have of late from the Immigration Service is that they are in fact looking to do that. We filed a host of different applications, from political asylum to a labor certification based on regular old-fashioned job sponsorship, and the visa lottery. Imagine this, that she won the lottery but a few months before she perished. To be so lucky to win but one of 55,000 visas that are given out to people all over the world, and yet to be so unlucky to lose your life. But what's really unfortunate about this case is that the family is still fighting for their rights, that they have to contend with lawyers and bureaucrats. It's just unconscionable, given the injury that they've suffered.
But what is the still pending question? And as you indicated, it's not on paper yet. The senator indicated that he has good news from the INS. But what is the still extenuating circumstances and questions? Is it to do with the fraud charge, at least, that was levied in '94? Is that the major holdup at the moment?
If I can, just to describe the fraud issue, our client filed a series of cases over the years and indicated to us at one point that he had filed for political asylum. Little did he know, or did we learn until after his wife died, when we saw the file under the Freedom of Information Act, that one of the people he went to actually filed a phony marriage case. Instead of applying for asylum, which our client had indicated he wanted to apply as a Georgian coming from a region where he felt persecuted from the former USSR, this unscrupulous person who held himself out as an attorney filed a fictitious marriage case, got his hand on some marriage certificates, found somebody that he had no connection to whatsoever, filed these papers. In one of the final hearings with our client, the Immigration Service then denied the case and approved his son's, indicating that he didn't come forward on this marriage. Well, we made it very clear to the government and proved thereafter that he had no idea who this person was that he allegedly married, nor did he know anything of the final disposition of this case. And we proved that this was a known charlatan, if you would, that the government had on file, who filed these kind of fictitious cases. The case ultimately depends on this. Are we going to use the resources or the bureaucracy and treat this as a normal case? Or are we going to look at this with compassion and remind ourselves that we're sending a very strong message, a very negative message, when we would treat those that come our way with Lady Liberty but a few blocks from the studio? We have to make sure that we send that a very strong message that if you come to our shores and you are a victim of terrorism, you are one of us and we will protect you. Let's marshal our resources and get those people that would want us harm or would use insidious methods of operations, as in the 9/11 attacks, and make sure the Immigration Service gets them.
If his wife had never perished on 9/11, what would be his residency status at the moment?
Well, it's because his wife died on 9/11 that his residency status would be treated differently. The answer to your question is he would be here without a status because his status was totally dependent on his wife. But the U.S. Patriot Act was promulgated by Congress in the waking days and weeks after the World Trade Center attack to do exactly what Congress intended to do, which was to put people like my client in a position as if their spouses had lived. One of the strongest things the government was going to do, besides marshaling resources to combat terrorism and create a stronger, more controlled border, a webless seam, if you would, was to make sure that people like Vasily and other clients that I've represented since then, unfortunately, put them in a position that their spouse had lived. And the simple fact is that had Vasily's wife lived, he would have been able to file for waivers of this fraud that was created by another attorney. And he would have been protected ultimately to remain here. And in fact, in this instance, is being punished because his wife was killed.
We've spoken to a few similar circumstances, not identical, they all vary, but widows who lost loved ones that had the citizenship